Committee. Let's crack on as we mean to proceed. Apologies. Do we have any apologies?
We do, yes. Apology from Councillor McAndrew, and also an apology from Councillor Walcombe. Councillor Burt is substituting for him. I've had an apology from Councillor Thomas, and I was told that Councillor Miley was substituting, but he's not here.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for those that stepped up. That's really helpful. Minutes of the 16th of January, you content that I sign those off as correct record? Can I have a proposer, seconder, and a thank you? Second, and a show of hands. Thank you very much. Chairman's announcements. As usual, I've kept them down to about 20 minutes. But to save you all, declarations of interest. Eric, share with us your declaration of interest, please.
It's merely
declaration of interest, not disinterest.
As always, yes. But I'm here, aren't I? Yes, I'm a member of Sawbridgeworth Town Council, which is listed as a recipient in the UK Shared Prosperity Fund.
Yeah, we'll find it in our hearts to forgive you. Okay, thank you for that. Right, well, let's crack on to item 5, UK Shared Prosperity Fund update. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Rachel.
Yes, so if town councillors need to declare an interest, I'm a Hertford town councillor.
Yeah, do you get? Are you getting anything from the shared?
It's mentioned, yeah.
You are, okay, yeah. Good. Let's please, yeah, let's get it out in the open now. If anything does arise during the course of the meeting, don't hesitate to try and catch my eye. It won't work, but do try and catch my eye. Same? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and the same.
And the same. Okay. I feel left out now. Okay, good. Thanks for that. Must remember when I ask that question to actually look. That'll be an improvement. Ben, good evening. Thanks. It's always a pleasure to have you in the chamber, especially when we can question you and scrutinise what you're doing.
And it's a pleasure to be here and be scrutinised. It's a long paper, 34 pages, so I won't go through it line by line. The reason it's so long is it's quite a good news story. This is, in inverted brackets, extra money that we have to do things with. And it's refreshing to say yes to people for a change rather than saying, no, we can't do that, we can't afford it, which is why I've slightly milked the paper. And there's a lot of detail in it. So apologies for that. But as I said, I won't give you a really detailed update of what's happening, just a quick sort of whistle-stop tour. And then I'm here to take any questions, as is the portfolio holder, and we've also got one of the other strand leads in the programme, Jonathan Gill, as well. So we'll do our best to kind of pick up any notes. But just in terms of the wider background, shared prosperity funding was talked about pretty soon after the referendum on Brexit. So back in 2016, the country previously received EU structural funding to do different projects, mostly around kind of business skills-based, some community-based type projects. And there were some questions after that about, well, what happens to the structural funding once it's gone? And the government said, don't worry, we've got this thing called the Shared Prosperity Fund. You'll all be getting a slice of that, and we'll release some details shortly. And those details promptly followed in 2022. So just 6 years later, we were updated with how it was all going to work in practice. So that was welcome, albeit slightly late. It's all part of the whole kind of levelling up approach. And you remember when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, this was the rhetoric at the time. It was all about levelling up in terms of different areas of the UK and making sure they could compete kind of nationally and internationally. That kind of language, you may have noticed, has fallen away. Fortunately for us, the funding that goes with it hasn't. So that's great. So the shared prosperity funding is still coming through, and the programme will still exist until the 31st of March 2025. Originally, the idea was that levelling up funding would go towards those areas most in need. East Herts, statistically speaking, is not an outlier. You won't be surprised to know. We seem to have some pockets and issues, but if you look at all the major metrics, your employment, skills, so forth, we are not an area in need. And I think at the time, government recognised there were many other areas like this as well, and that levelling up might actually mean different things to different places. And therefore, it's probably right that some areas get a little bit of the overall pot. So that's what happened with the shared prosperity funding. Every single area has an allocation based on a formula on population. We're getting about £1.77 million over the 3 years, and that's topped up with something called the Rural Prosperity Fund, which is another strand of levelling up. aimed at those areas that have inverted brackets kind of rural needs. Rural definition is actually quite loose under this scheme. It's any population, any settlement with a population of under 30,000. So the only places that don't qualify under that basis are Hertford, according to the latest census, and Bishop Stortford. Nevertheless, £2.25 million over 3 years to be spent on communities in place, on business and skills, and sorry, business and skills are too. So that's what we got. So work started in summer 22. And we'd had a lot of engagement events, talking to different partners, bring them all together, all culminated in a workshop in Fletcher's Lee and Ware, where we went through the different priorities. And through working with partners, through working with councillors and different stakeholders, we alighted on 4 different priority areas that we felt this money should be spent on. So that was the cultural strategy, which was adopted that summer, which is very much around empowering community organisations and doing community work. The climate change strategy, which was also adopted around the same time, speaks for itself. Also something around town and village centres, and the village bit's quite important there because there was certainly an appetite from many people across the district to say some of the usual suspects in the area, namely Hertford and Bishop Stortford, seemingly have most of the investment directed there. Wouldn't it be nice for some of this investment to go to some of the other often overlooked towns and villages as well? So not just Buntingford, Sawbridgeworth and Ware, but also some of the smaller villages, and that was recognised as being important as well. And then the very last theme was around supporting businesses, which is very much a continuation of some of the work we'd already done. So those priorities were all agreed back in January at Council, January 2023, and a series of individual projects kind of underneath them agreed for that particular year, and then some kind of headline priorities for the following 2 years, taking us through to the 31st of March 2025. Obviously, the election in May of last year meant that we had to revisit that council decision, and in consultation with some of the portfolio holders that are now responsible for allocating that money. Well, there's one here tonight, also the leader of the council can speak for themselves, but the steer I had in those conversations was they were broadly happy with the council decision from January last year. The overall direction of travel, the 4 themes still felt right in terms of the process that had been taken, the level of buy-in that we had, maybe some adjustments to the individual project, but we'd stay on course with what we've agreed, and that's largely what's happened. So the paper itself goes through the 4 themes, where we are, what's been spent to date, and what the headline plans are for next year. So I can stop there and take any questions, or I can carry on going through in more detail, but I'll really take your steer.
I think the detail will emerge as we go through it, and I'd like to start the ball rolling because I particularly welcome this idea around town and village centres, because there has been a feeling amongst those that, like me, represent the villages, that they've taken quite a hit, probably sometimes out of proportion with development. But you know, the Section 106 goes into the library in the nearest town, or the or services in a town that people don't necessarily go to very often, and perhaps don't identify as being there, you know, in their particular bailiwick. So it's nice to see that that's come forward, and I, for one, will watch that with interest. But then again, also the business support element, because for me, I'm always amazed at the number of businesses, and bear in mind that a lot of the businesses in Hertfordshire employ sub 20 people. A lot of the businesses are in the villages. They're in the smaller industrial estates. They're in barns. They're in farmers buildings. I do hope that we are keeping track of those, and they can benefit from business support as well as the bigger names that we all know and love. So I'll just start that out there, and I'm looking around. Caroline. Can you put
on in the table on page 27, where it gives how much is the themes and all the money? I was a bit alarmed. I was alarmed by the tiny amount of the levelling up funding allocated, almost as an afterthought, for skills and transport projects. In some of the papers later on in the next item we're going to discuss, there's the loss of the European fund for helping people develop skills and literacy and digital skills. has not been replaced. It was replaced by a quarter, but that's going to be removed, I believe. So there's nothing for development of skills. And as I come from a ward where there definitely needs to be some input into the skills of the local people, I find that quite odd. I know that we've £50,000 is a drop in the ocean compared to what other things have received, and very late in the day because we're planning for the last year, aren't we? And there's nothing left. So yeah, I wonder if you could.
Yeah,
comment on that.
absolutely pick that up. They were very clear, they being government, very clear in the guidance that the skills theme, which is the third overall theme, no money to be spent on that until year 3. And the reason is that the reason it was year 3 spending only is that EU structural funding for skills and employment based projects was still being honoured until 23-24. So what they were saying is EU is still covering the existing projects. You can only use your year 3 funding for skills and transport, and skills and transport at that stage. So the conversation that took place during that process throughout 22 was very much, let's park any skills discussions for now, maybe hold some money back in due course. Obviously that then followed through at the council decision. The other thing to add in there is as well that obviously we aren't the only, or this isn't the only funding for skills, and the county council had quite a chunky amount of money, much more so than we had. Obviously it's covering the whole county to cover skills and employment based initiatives. So we still haven't determined exactly what this where this £50,000 is going to go. It's still being held back. We've had a couple of conversations with some providers, and I know the portfolio holder and myself have been talking about holding a couple of careers fairs with businesses and education providers later in the year. But I think that the reasoning behind that is that we wouldn't be the major deliverer of any skills-based projects in any case, and there are other funding streams to support skills specifically.
That's good to hear, and you've explained that very well, but I'm still a bit concerned that East Herts is the only Hertfordshire authority who's not contributing to this LEP and HCC step 2 skills, from what I read on the paper in the next tranche of papers. So why are we not doing that?
Again, it was council decision back in January to not contribute. Having said that, we are contributing to 3 other LEP schemes, which is around business growth, again mentioned in these papers. So there's the growth hub, which supports businesses being more productive that have been in existence for a while. So it's kind of second stage growth. There's also the Get Enterprising project, which is around business startups. And then there's the Herts Film Office as well, which is supporting. So those are the 3 LEP-based projects that we are topping up. Again, the council decision back in January last year, the LEP provided a kind of menu of different programs in existence for each of the districts to pick from in terms of where they'd like additional provision. Those were the 3 that this council opted for. And I think some of the other councils that are inputting into the skills-based projects are probably not inputting into other things like the growth hub and so forth.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Ben was saying. I think there will be other opportunities. The what was the LEP is now morphing into a new economic committee that will be associated with the county council. The growth board also issued their visions in the past week or so, and skills will be very much part of that. I just wanted to say that I'm pleased that the elements for cultural strategy are still there. That was very important, and I think will add to the health and well-being of our residents. I wasn't able to get to the cross-party forum. I had another meeting a couple of weeks ago, but I hope to be joining that. But yeah, pleased to see the emphasis on culture. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thanks, Sue.
Thank you. I echo the welcoming of the decision to target funding at smaller towns and parishes, which in the past have been overlooked somewhat. The report highlights the fact that there are not many applications from smaller parishes, though, and none of the 4 in my ward seem to have applied for anything, although Buntingford Town Council are in negotiations at the moment. When I raised the subject of UK SPF at one of the parish meetings last week, they said they hadn't heard of it, even though they had a project that was ideally suited to receiving funding. So it looks like the office has made some considerable effort to get in contact with them. And I just wonder what might have gone wrong and whether there might be some money left over that they could apply for next year.
Yeah, I know it's helpful to hear that feedback. I think always willing to listen to that. I thank you for your comments about the fact that the economic development team did make considerable efforts to go to all the town and parish councils from the summer of 22 onwards, and there's a detailed process listed in here in terms of how we contacted all the clerks, all the different councillors. We went to the town and village parish council conference. We did site visits. We followed up the communications. We also alerted all the district councillors, and we ended up from the 37 villages and the 5 towns with about 14 applications in the end, which I guess is not a fantastic percentage return rate. I think our experience is, the reality is that many of those smaller villages simply don't have the capacity to think about some of this extra stuff on top of the day job when they're already leading very busy lives outside of the parish work. So obviously we were there to kind of help them shape ideas, but we really did need the ideas to come from those organisations in the first place. I think what obviously has happened for those parishes that have elections where there was a big turnover, some of all that work that took place in 2022 was kind of lost. Now our economic development team did reconnect with some of those parishes. Obviously, people coming in new, probably just getting to grips with the role. So I think possibly there may have been some opportunities lost in that process. I think what I would say is there is still some unallocated monies in this strand. We are still committed to the idea of having it go to those areas that are often overlooked. So if any parish has an idea which they think fits into these criteria, do come and talk to us and ultimately be the portfolio holder for planning and growth decision on where the money gets spent.
Very good to hear. Thank you.
I'm a bit challenged by that because I must have missed people coming to talk to the parishes in my ward because I would have very much engaged with that process. And I don't recall being aware of that process going on. So perhaps that's something that we should be thinking about. And obviously we all recognise, those of us that work with parishes on a regular basis, that the job of clerking is, as you've alluded to, sometimes you've got a clerk that covers several parishes and they manage to pick up a bit more, but they don't have any employees. They have a clerk who very often is having to work quite hard to keep ahead of all the requirements that they have to deal with, and at the same time are not always in a position to pick up on some of these other points. And if people are coming to my parish councils and town councils, I'd really like to know about it, so I can do everything I can to A, support the process, and B, get my hands on as much money for the parish as possible, to put it bluntly. Yes, please. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm glad you pointed out the thing about the elections, because it came up actually because I was at the cross-party meeting about arts, and also having read the papers, it said that the clerk or CEO of the different councils were contacted and the leaders of the council. But I tried following up and to try and find out. I mean, the trouble for Bishop Stortford is we had a new CEO and a new council, and I think things have got lost. So I think it is something to note in future. If you've got a change like that, then things ought to be reissued, really. Yeah, and another challenge for parish councils, while I've got the floor, is that they meet. Some only meet every second month. And if something comes out in the week after a parish council meeting, it's going to be an inordinate amount of time before they get to consider it. And this often stymies some really quite useful work could otherwise be done.
Yeah, I was just sort of picking up on the parishes. I was also concerned that there were, I think, only 6 of the parish, 6 of the villages that had received funds, and I think you said in the report that all of those that had applied had actually had got funds, which which is good. But picking up on the smaller settlements, I was pleased to see in the climate change section that there was work on community halls in villages. And also pleased to see the energy hubs, the work on energy hubs that is part of this. So they were things that I wanted to commend. The other thing that you mentioned, and the question that I would follow up in, is around the levelling up agenda and the concern that whether, and particularly with the skills, noting what's been said earlier, whether that could be focused on communities, either communities of locality or communities of minorities where there is known to be deprivation, whether in fact some consideration could be given to looking at those areas, bearing in mind the discussion that we've already had.
Peter.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. It was really just a question for Ben, just following up from what others were saying about contact with parish councils, and I do just I understand that all parish clerks were written to. I'm curious to understand how many of them you actually got a response from. So there's something about, because engagement is a two-way process. And that would be an interesting fact to know where have we got silent parishes that just haven't come back, because there's lots of different reasons that might not have happened, and it could be as simple as the clerk's changed, the email address was wrong, or it could be that they don't understand enough about it, and they haven't taken up that offer of having a conversation. And my other question, because looking at the projects that have been granted funding, there's quite a variety in terms of the type of fund, and that's quite right. And I do wonder whether is there an upper limit on what you would provide in terms of a grant to a rural community, because I guess there are some potentially projects out there that are not coming forward because people think actually it's too big for what is being asked for. And I'm aware of one particular one that I just think the likelihood of getting funding for that is pretty slim, and it's potentially putting people off coming forward.
Yeah, it's very valid. Any comments here, Ben?
I was actually going to come back on a comment a couple of people ago. On the village and town centres requests, we sent out a spreadsheet in, I believe, July, with all of the projects listed in there with the values and everything else. I know Ben will come back on the other bits and pieces, but in terms of project limits, I believe the most expensive one I've seen on the spreadsheet is about 800K's worth. So if you're looking at something north of that, that might be a bit of a challenge. But yes, there's some chunky projects on there.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification.
I can just to pick up the other points raised by Councillor Boylan there. I think the scenarios you've outlined there in which we may not get a response, the different scenarios, but possibly all of those took place. Either clerk had changed, addresses were wrong, or people are so busy they outside of the parish clerk work, they didn't really know much about it. What we did find, it was a good opportunity to sort of clear out old email addresses, and we did get responses, so we were able to have a kind of slightly updated spreadsheet. I don't know the exact figure of who actually followed through with more contact, but it definitely was not 100%. I think anecdotally we ended up seeing about half of the parish councils for sort of follow-up conversations. Now, obviously, what then came forward was sort of 11 worked up projects. There were quite a number of ideas which ended up on the cutting room floor because they weren't necessarily fully worked out projects, or it wasn't clear kind of who the stakeholders or the leads would be. So many parishes had ideas about improving all the road network and so forth. You know, the conversation was, you know, how far have you got with the county council on kind of planning permission and seeking out the works? And it was kind of, well, we haven't done any of that yet. So you know, the delivery of some of these things within these timescales would be pretty tight. So I think the example Vicky gave there, we have many projects which I would say were undeliverable within the time scale and hadn't properly been tested. Now the economic development team were there to help some of these groups work through some of that, but obviously not here to manage the whole project. And the projects which have been successful are the ones which the parish councils have had some capacity to deliver some of that work themselves, or bring somebody on to do it. So we focused on the things that are most deliverable. And obviously they tend to be kind of lower value and a bit more modest in ambition. And so there are still a few on the cutting room floor which we think aren't deliverable for huge amounts. What I have got, which I'm very happy to share, knowing full well throughout this process that I will probably be challenged about the level of contact provided with parish councils, and you know, some pushback to say colleagues haven't heard of this. I did keep a complete audit trail of every single contact we had with average parish council, and every day emails went out on every phone call we made, which I can share. And we did that from the start just to make sure that when that sort of challenge arose, I could share it with people. I think some would have absolutely been overlooked, one or two that have kind of slipped through that aren't aware of it because of the changes. And like I said, if you've got ideas, come and talk to us now.
So can I just follow up just very quickly? So if it's not 100% response, is there a role for elected members to help follow up those, so that we know that actually we've covered all of them and opportunities have been searched?
Yeah, so I did, as our portfolio holder mentioned, I did just give a heads up to all the district councillors a couple of months, well, more than a couple of months ago now in the summer, to say this is where we've got to. I appreciate that in the, you know, in the, I'm sure the multiple emails you get all day in, day out, one email with a spreadsheet and a load of gump from me was probably not standing out, but I can certainly reissue that so you can have another look.
Rachel, just while we're on that, just get it through now. Yeah, you're obviously aware. I mean, there are a number of challenges around parishes. It's not so much of an issue now, but I was aware of a situation probably 10 years ago where a couple of parishes, you'd send something to the clerk and the council or the leader would, or the chairman would never hear any more about it. You need a scattergun approach, but I do feel there's very much a place for members. I talk to both the clerks and the leaders on a regular basis. This hasn't come up. It should have come up. I should have, and if it hadn't have come up, I should have been aware of it so that I could make it come up. So yeah, let's do some work around that, Ben. That would be helpful. Where do we get to, Rachel? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so lots of excellent projects. I'd just like to sort of echo what's already been said about people and skills, and focusing on, I know that's not a lot of money, £50,000, but I wonder which particular training providers are being sort of spoken to, and because it's important in terms of our areas of deprivation and also in terms of our demographics, our aging demographic, which means that I think it's like something like in 2030, 57% of, only 57% of people will be of working age. So we do need to make sure that that we don't lose anybody in that process. I had just a couple of other sort of questions of detail. One is a really basic, I'm sure this is really basic, but on page 23, it talks that there's just a really small table, and it talks about the revenue and capital parts of the grant, and I wasn't quite sure what that meant. Isn't all the grant capital, or I mean, as I say, it's probably a basic question. So that's my second question. My third question was on the cultural activities grant. It's good that there's only one application form for all the different funds that there are. But how are they triaged? How do you decide which cultural activity gets money from which pot? So. those
So
are my
yeah,
first
sorry,
ones.
there's a couple of questions. I'll pick up something. I know my colleagues portfolio to the left and my colleague Jonathan to the left as well may want to come in. So just a couple of things there. So in terms of the skills, yeah, I understand the importance. As I said earlier, that we are not the only organisation in the whole kind of landscape of skills delivery to be thinking about this. And £50,000 isn't going to make much of an impact. We're not yet at the stage of talking to any skills providers or thinking about how that, what that could be used specifically for. The only idea that we think we can move ahead with in conjunction with the LEP and local businesses and schools is having some career fairs which kind of connect young people to local businesses, and we think that might be something we can actually run because I say we're not in the business of delivering skills. And I say we're not quite not at the stage of talking to providers. That would all be done through the LEP. On the capital requirements, on the table, yes, it's kind of accountant speak to some extent. This is just the way that central governments allocate the funding. There are some rules basically around how you can use the revenue in the capital, and that's all kind of spelt out in sort of various bits of legislation. And it's really to do with how we allocate the money and how the grant funding agreements kind of stipulate the rules around that. The odd thing is, if you're a recipient of a grant from a business perspective or a community group perspective, it actually makes not one bit of difference whether it comes through our revenue or capital accounts in terms of how it gets spent. It's just the local government accounting rules, unfortunately. But it's just something we have to be mindful of when we report back to central government. And then the cultural stuff, I know Jonathan will pick up on the application form there, but the paper that went to, I can't remember if it was Scrutiny or Council a couple of months ago, talking about the application forms, also had a policy outlining how the application forms would be scored and the criteria for each of the three strands. So that's all published and is available on our website. So any organisation applying should be able to tell which grants they think their grants, which objectives they think their grant meets, and then officers would score against that. But all that information is in the public domain.
Excellent, thank you, Nam.
Thank you. I'm assuming you didn't want to come back further on. No, cool. Yeah, I'll go then. There's lots to like in this report, and thank you for all the work. I've enjoyed seeing the exec member out and about on Twitter as some of this comes online. A few areas where I was wondering if you could kind of expand a bit on what's in the report. One was kind of touching on the funding. So my understanding is, we've got this pot of money that is coming through to 2025, and then who knows what the government is going to do after that. So with that in mind, like how much have you been thinking about the long term sort of financial viability of the projects that we're putting support into? That was question one. Similarly, 213, you talked a little bit about the change in priorities as the new members were elected last year. Could you just expand a little bit on kind of what's being kind of bumped up the priority list and what a little bit less so? And finally, there's which page was it? 255 talks about there being sort of order of 250k for a larger project and options for that being discussed at the moment. I wonder if you just kind of give a little bit more detail about, is that planned for something in one of the villages again, or what's the sort of thinking around that? There's just that's obviously a chunk of money there, and there wasn't a huge amount of detail. So thoughts on that?
So if I pick up the first point, then I think the portfolio holder might want to pick up the point about the some of the changes politically, and also the point in 255. So I think it's a really good point about this is a time limited piece of work which ends on the 31st of March 2025. You're absolutely right. Government have not said anything more about the next round of this. Certainly the language of levelling up has fallen away. My view is we may expect something shortly before an election's announced, possibly. That's just speculation, however. But at this stage, we're working on the basis there is no more money for this funding round beyond that date, and therefore we've been very keen when we're talking to the project applicants, particularly in the cultural strategy and the town centre work, that there had to be some sort of legacy from this work. So if it's a cultural strategy piece of work, it can't just be a time limited thing which ends this year and then that's it. And the Arts in East Herts showcase work that's happening on the cultural strategy, it's very much about being financially sustainable beyond this year. All the projects that we've looked at in the town and villages is around having a longer lifespan than just this year. So we've been very mindful about building in a legacy or long-term sustainability for any grants we've given out, whether that be kind of physical infrastructure projects or to community groups. So I think we are trying to squeeze as much leverage out of this fund as we can. And of course, in the vast majority of cases, there is a match funding requirement. So the idea is this brings in additional money, whether it's private sector from businesses or other grants or money raised through voluntary groups as well. All of that hopefully should make this as sustainable as possible. So we're hoping it does have a lifetime beyond 31st of March next year. But I'll hand over to the portfolio holder for the other points.
So on the priorities, I was basically looking for probably doing more smaller projects as opposed to spending all the money on some of the large projects, because basically most of the towns, not all of them, had put in some quite large projects that were 400, 500 Ks worth in anticipation of getting most of that money from UK SPF. Whereas what I was looking for was I'd rather that somebody got a piece of the pie as opposed to one town or village getting most of the pie and everybody else getting a few crumbs. So it was about distribution. It was about doing as much as we could with the money that we had. With the villages in particular, the things that I've been most impressed about is the fact that a lot of the projects, it's only buying materials because all the labour's coming free from the local community, which I think is fabulous. But it was also looking at, you said about the long-term viability of them, and yes, some of them, like the bus shelter that that only has half a roof, because the rest of it's fallen off, and they're going to replace the roof and give it a lick of paint. Yes, in 10, 15 years' time, that's going to need doing again. But, at least it means that the public transport is usable. In terms of things like some of the village halls, because we did some of the installation on village halls through the town centre, village centre funding, and some through the climate change funding. I remember the one for Little Berkhamsted, which basically the application said we want to insulate the roof because it's got no insulation and we can't use the hall in the winter because it's too cold and we can't afford to heat it. So in terms of long-term viability, that to me is you've actually got something you can use throughout 12 months. Therefore, it should generate more income and also provide a community benefit. So it was, with all the projects, I was looking into what it would give to the local community, what sort of cash it might generate, but not necessarily just around that, but also whether there would be additional costs that would then make it a burden. And most of the things we were looking at were around cost savings, revenues, revenue and revenue generation. You said about the 250K. We would like to do a large project at the moment, or a larger project, just so that there is something that's a bit more tangible. At the moment, none of the applications that we've got in really tick the box. And it may be that if we got, and I'm not saying this is the right answer, and Ben's probably going to glare at me in a second, but if we got 10 projects in for 25K, we might do those instead. I'm not saying that it's about whether the right project is there. And at the moment, there's nothing that really comes to the top.
Sorry, Ari. Thank you. Can I just go back to the table on page 23, 24, which is around the annual allocations of funds between revenue and capital and total, and also to section 2.5, which talks about the timing of the allocation of funding has been quite late, and so therefore the funds from 22-23 being rolled over into 23-24. is that the same for 23-24? So funds that have not been allocated during this financial year, are they being rolled forward into next year, or are those lost?
Yeah, thanks for that. The initial guidance when we signed the grant funding agreement were that Deluxe were not going to be flexible on this at all, and it was use it or lose it. Which, given that 2022-23, we got the grant funding agreement signed in January of that financial year, and telling us you've got to spend it all by the 31st of March seemed a bit ridiculous, and many areas fed that back. So government did kind of flex on that and say, okay, yes, you can roll that forward into next year, maybe to the summer of 23-24. And that was based on the council decision reflected that back in January. But they said absolutely no movement on the following year. It's use it or lose it for that 23-24 allocation. However, in the last month or so, many areas have come back and said, yeah, we're still struggling to kind of spend all the money. Can we have a bit of flexibility? And they have said, yes, okay, you can probably roll some of this money forward. We're in a position now actually where the vast majority of that this year's fund is allocated already. So we don't have to roll over that much. So they started off by saying no flexibility at all. And they changed slightly, so there is some flexibility. Net result is we won't lose anything. And I think even if the prospect was on the table of potentially spending something on a project which didn't deliver a load of outcomes, but it gets returned to or a choice between that or returning it to government, I think we just go for that project. But fortunately, we're not in that position.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just picking up on the phrase "what ticks the box," really. So I guess it's whatever that is, and it's also, as Ben was saying, deliverability. So it could be either one large project or part of a big project, or some of it going to whatever else can be delivered. But there needs to be certainty on that. That's all. Thank you.
Vicky, I kind of struck a chord with me when you said that there was Little Beckhamstead got a grant for the insulation because they couldn't use the hut in the winter. Well, one of our halls lost its roof last year, and if we'd have known about this, we would have come begging. No roof is, I think that stumps no insulation.
Just about.
Okay, we're getting there, I think, slowly. Sue, would you like to wind up for us?
Yeah, I've got a couple of points. I wondered whether the decision to delegate the funding decisions to the decision-making process to the heads of services and executive members had meant more applications were successful in securing the money they applied for, given that more specialist knowledge was available, and to iron out any potential issues and give advice. And also, were there any major difficulties, common or glaring errors that were identified in applications that meant funding was unable to be allocated? Is there any way these could have been mitigated through briefings or training sessions in advance? And just looking towards the future, I mean, I've been doing the round of parish councils and they've been preparing their budgets for the next year. And many of them have just got £10,000 in reserve, which is no money whatsoever. I'm just thinking about the future. This funding is running out. What hope have they got of repairing community assets and things that build their community in the future? It's looking pretty bleak for them, isn't it?
Just a couple of things. I think probably the portfolio head might want to pick up on the point about how the delegated authorities had any bearing on some of the decision making. That's fairly standard for sort of council decision, just for officers acting in consultation with the exec members to deal with the detail. But I accept your point, and no doubt Councillor Glover Ward will pick it up. It's a good point about the application process, and what have we learnt from it, and so forth. In Jonathan's area at the moment, we are going through the applications. I think the feedback I've had from colleagues is there's a relatively small amount of money there. It's oversubscribed, as you'd expect. Lots of good applications. We can't fund everything we'd like to, but the reality is we have to have a criteria and a policy to help us get to the ones that fit the criteria most appropriately. So no doubt Jonathan can comment on that. I think just to say on the town centre side of things, this is probably my fault for maybe misleading some people in the room. Although I talked about us giving out grants, just to be absolutely clear, there was not a grant application process. There was nothing published to say parish councils, here is an application form, or any other organisation, here's an application form, come and bid to us. It was a closed process whereby we would only speak to parishes and town councils about their needs and their particular projects. And we would work with them on getting some expressions of interest and some tangible projects to come forward. If at that point it looked like they were deliverable and they were going to hit the objectives, we would support those through a delegated decision, and the mechanism by which we transfer the money happens to be a grant. But it's not a grant process in the sense that anybody could access it and see the criteria and apply for it. And there's a similar process with the business grants as well, because what we found in the past is if you open up a business grant, we are inundated with organisations that want free money. But obviously, once you start to go through the applications, you start to work out what they're trying to use it for. It's kind of very spurious things like paying off someone's salary, with no real outputs attached to it. So what we didn't want to do was sift through a load of pointless applications and just have a closed process whereby we have an initial chat with the recipients and then see whether there's anything worthwhile that we can take forward, which in turn becomes a grant if we do give them the money. So I hope that makes sense. But there is certainly a bit of learning on the cultural strategy grant process.
Excellent, thank you. Sue, you content with that?
I think that having an exec member that asks a lot of questions about the projects, and also because after we did send out the spreadsheet, a number of district councillors did actually contact us about specific projects in their wards. We did then go out to at least 2 of the towns and assisted them in getting the projects that looked like they should get over the line, I think is the best way of putting it. There was discussion because some of the projects that were presented didn't have the level of detail. It was around level of detail rather than anything else. And we didn't want any of the towns, it wasn't the parishes, to miss out, and specifically the smaller towns. I don't know whether you've noticed, but Bishop Stortford and Hertford have been allocated about half of what Sawbridge, Worth, Buntingford and forgot about Ware, shouldn't do, it's only down the road. What they've had each, the budget for Hertford and Bishop Stortford was deliberately about half of what the smaller towns got.
Okay, thank you. I think it's time to reflect on the recommendations which are on page 22. The first being that committee members review progress to date, which we have. Thank you, Ben. The second being that committee members make any suggestions for the lead executive members' consideration regarding investment and allocation of UK SPF resources. I would hope that you would allow us a little bit of time after this meeting to come forward with suggestions rather than in this meeting, because I think most of us now will go away and look at this in with fresh eyes. But what I would like also to put before you is, and not necessarily to be incorporated into the recommendation, but certainly minuted and taken away by officers, that towns of a size may well have individuals within their organisation, probably officers, whose task it is to find funds and find grants. And they're probably far better, well, I know they're far better able to have or bring together quickly shovel-ready projects to help you get them over the line. The parishes simply can't do that. So I would like some thought to be given to what could be done to assist parishes into these processes. There will be other monies coming forward at some stage in the future, whatever it's called. There will be funding available in a similar sort of guise and vein. So I would like a recognition, and I would like you to support the recognition that parishes in particular need an extra level of support over and above that that the towns might enjoy, so that they can be thinking about shovel-ready projects. They will be smaller by nature, but nonetheless, they haven't got the capacity to do that on their own without at least a great deal of encouragement. And I think the encouragement has been a little bit short in that regard. I'm looking around at those with parish responsibilities. I think that's an agreement. So you've noted that, Peter? So could you accept recommendation A and recommendation B as it sits there, with the caveat that the lead executive member will give us a reasonable amount of time to come forward once we've had a chance to look at this in more detail, go through Ben's spreadsheet, which he's going to send out shortly, and we can look at it with those fresh eyes that I alluded to. Are you content?
Can we have a proposal for that?
Yes, yeah, we got it. So Peter's proposing. Seconder? Thank you. Nick seconding. Show of hands? All good. Thank you very much. Sorry. Vicky, having picked up on something that was raised a while ago around markets, Vicky has very kindly put together a magic lantern show for us with some work that she's got to show us on markets. So those on the top bench are now going to move aside, and we look forward to seeing what you've got.
Right, hopefully you're sitting comfortably. So I'll begin. So it's a relatively quick presentation. I'm hoping you'll let me get through all the slides without asking me any questions. If you want to ask me some questions at the end, that's all great. Because basically we've been running a small market revival project, but as I'm sure everybody's noticed, it has made its way onto the corporate plan. So we do have a few more things to go. If we can have the next slide, please. So I've put together a short agenda, the history of how we got to where we are now, what are actually East Herts markets, because not all of the markets in East Herts are licensed by ourselves, even though we are the market authority. The project phasing of the 3 phases that we want to go through, where we've got to date, and a lot of detail on the production of the new policy. But if you ask me too much about the legals, Jonathan's answering. So if we can go to the next slide. History is, in 2018, East Herts, up until 2018, East Herts was licensing the markets under the Market Act. For whatever reasons, it was decided to move from licensing under the Markets Act to licensing under the Street Trading Act. Licensing under the Street Trading Act is great if you want to park a food wagon somewhere 28 days out of 28 days and street trade. It is not quite as great for markets because it doesn't give the same flexibility as you get licensing under the Markets Act. East Herts also, I'm assuming as a cost-cutting measure, decided to get rid of the market beadle, who used to do the 2 things that we do as the market authority, which is basically run the markets, get new stalls, make sure the stalls turn up, but also to provide the license to those stall holders, which is the legal thing that means they can actually trade on the street. The other thing that happened was that the town councils were asked if they wanted to run their own markets. 2020, 2021, most of the markets where they were selling food, the stalls could continue, but a lot of them fell by the wayside. And I'm sure you've all noticed that the local markets have got a lot smaller. A lot of the stall holders just didn't return. They either took the opportunity to retire or they just couldn't make it work and took on something else. 2022 markets moved from East Hart's operation to East Hart's licensing. Now, East Hart's licensing are not market specialists. They're not great at getting new stall holders. They are there to do the legal side of things, as you would expect from our licensing people. Where Market had gone down to about 4 stalls, Hertford at about 8 stalls. Just so everybody is aware, when we sell the licenses for markets, we sell them by the pitch. You can have a stall taking 2 pitches, 1 pitch, 5 pitches, depending on the size of it. So some of the stalls will pay for 3 or 4 pitches, basically, if they're a large stall. 2023, basically around last September, we started proper work with both licensing and the comms team, without any specific budget or anything else to try and start on a market revival project. We also started to scope what that project could look like. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So where we are with the East Harts markets, we have a mixture of licensing. These are the markets we know about. I suspect somebody's going to run up to me afterwards and say you've forgotten one, and then we will know about that market as well. So East Harts licenses the charter market every Saturday in Hertford, the farmers market in Hertford, which is once a month, the fish and veg Friday, because they've got street trading licenses under the Street Trading Act. They can rock up on a Friday and also do stalls, but we only get 2 stalls. The Ware weekly market, which is a Tuesday, we don't know whether Ware has got a charter or not, so we're calling it a weekly market at the moment, but it might be a charter market. We haven't done the research yet. And then vis-a-vis the town councils, Bishop Stortford has fully devolved, taken on all their market authority within Bishop Stortford, and they run, I believe, a weekly charter market and also a farmers market on a specific day. Ware runs a monthly farmers market during the summer months. So I think they do 6 or 7 outside and the rest inside. Just to be clear, markets on the street require a license. If you're doing an indoor market, that's a whole different kettle of fish and doesn't come under the Marketing Act. Markets Act, sorry. And then Buntingford has got a charter market, and that is weekly on a Monday, and that is also being run by the Buntingford Town Council. If we can go on to the next slide. So we've had to do the project in 3 phases, primarily because we cannot do the things that we want to do using our current markets policy, because it is so limiting, and we need to change the policy, and that is the bit that's going to take us time. So if you like, phase 2 starts as soon as we've got a new policy. So phase 1 is a relatively soft start. So basically officers have been working on a new market license policy. That this also includes a different pricing structure, because one of the things we want to do is, it's not going to quite be a bog off, but basically if you buy a license for one market, you can have a license for another market for a slightly reduced rate, because we're not having to do the paperwork twice. Well, we are, but we don't have to do all the checks and everything and all that sort of thing. We've done some soft marketing. I came up with a mission statement. I am no marketing expert, so it's really simple. More stalls, more shoppers. That's my market policy. That's my market mission statement. We are guinea pigging it at Hertford, because our base idea is Hertford is not has still got a decent number of stalls. It is not brilliant. But we can build on that, and then hopefully once we change the market policy, we can persuade those stall holders to also have a stall at Ware, and we'll do some marketing for Ware, etc., with reaching out to local businesses, discount cards, all that sort of good stuff to get some footfall there. We are recruiting for a part-time temporary officer to basically go out and recruit us some more stalls, because that's a bit of a specialist job. We have already contacted, and you saw part of the leaflet on the beginning slide, businesses in East Herts that we think might want a market stall, previous market stall holders, and there's been a little bit of soft advertising, but we're not going full Puckamonte on it until we can change the policy. We have on the to-do list doing some housekeeping on the stalls for the farmers market, because it's an entry level. So basically you can rock up with your goods and you get a gazebo and you get tables and you put your stuff out and you can sell, and then you can go home and you don't have to do all that heavy lifting and shifting. You don't have to have a van, etc., etc. So it means that young entrepreneurs, people starting out in business, can come to the farmers market, and it's a low cost way of them starting out. With the market stalls, our stalls are getting on a little bit. We have quite a lot of them. We don't think we know not all of them work. Basically with the stalls, the housekeeping we want to do is to check how many we have got that where the metal frames still work, cannibalize any of the metal frames that we can, where we can make a Franken stall out of 2 gazebos or whatever else, but also to look at what we would need to purchase in terms of frames, and then get new covers for all of them, because the covers are shot. They've got great big holes in them, they're filthy, and they are beyond redemption, most of them. So that's what I mean by housekeeping on the stalls. We will look at, we have been, and I think the nice way of putting this is regularising the market licensing with the town councils that are not Bishop Stortford that have been licensing, to make sure that they're ticking all the boxes and making sure that everything is being done properly. And we've got, in the next couple of months, the National Association of British Markets Association coming in to review our markets, to tell us, you know, good, bad and indifferent, and make recommendations. Phase 2, basically, we've got the market policy. We can go full Puckamonte on campaigning and advertising for more stalls, more shoppers. We have been talking to, we would also be looking to have some additional private markets where you get a private operator in, which is one of the other things that we can't do, like the vegan market that circle the district, to maybe do some of those in some of our towns as well, to generate more footfall. Phase 3, basically that would be the reflective side of things, where we look back at how we're doing it and see what we could do better. There are numerous ideas about this. The licensing officer was talking to me today about other markets or other towns where they do a dragon's den for local school children, and basically have 5 teams. They all come up with a product. They get given a small amount of money to produce that product, and then they have a day of selling it on one of your markets as a freebie, basically, to see whoever sells, you know, the most. So there's various bits and pieces like that that we can then start to do that will generate more footfall and more interest. If we can have the next slide, please. Basically where we're at the moment, with the soft marketing, we've managed to get 2 new stalls on the weekly charter market. We've got 3 new stalls on the farmers market, 2 that are starting in a week on Saturday, and 1 next month. We've done the logo and marketing material. Basically, you've seen it on some of the pictures I've put up. We have, as I say, we've gone out to existing stall holders and also to other potential stall holders. We've been doing a little bit of very low-key social media, which mostly involves me photoing people and sticking it on Twitter, and asking lots of people to retweet it for me. But we've also managed to establish that Hertford Town Council, Hertford market is definitely a charter market, because one of our town councillors spent a very long few and dusty hours in Hal's, digging out the charters, and the Hertford charter is 1375. So we are claiming that we've had a market every Saturday since 1375, you know, because nobody can prove that there wasn't one due to bubonic plague or something. The other markets both councillors and also officers have been to Ware. We've had a couple of meetings with Ware Town Council about their market and how we would sort that out. We've been having also ongoing discussions with Buntingford, and we've seen their charter, but there is some logistical difficulties with getting more stalls for Buntingford because there isn't that much space for it. They don't have a market square, basically. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. Basically, with the market policy, there are two routes. Depends on whether Overview and Scrutiny decide to call in the policy or not when we do the document. So either we will be, well, we are going to be April to May looking at putting the licence policy together, covering the costs off, all that sort of good stuff, and doing a consultation on what our new policy will be. And then either it comes to yourselves, if you want to call it in, June or October meetings, and then goes to exec. It doesn't have to go through full council, by the way. It'll just go through exec once it's been wherever it's going. Or alternatively, it can go straight to exec, dependent on what you decide. And final slide, please. Absolutely.
Stop me when you get bored or you want to chip in. Charter markets, is that to do with the old, how far you can canter a horse in? How many minutes, which usually comes out at 6 miles or something?
Yeah, it's something to do with how far you can ride to a market and back on a horse in a day. If you've got a charter, then no other town within that distance can have a charter, can have a market on the same day, or they have to give you the money that they take at their market. I believe.
That sounds very Norman to me. Good, thank you for that. We got that out of the way. Demographics. My aged grandmother would be in the market, the Ridley Road market in East London, and she'd buy toilet paper by the sheet back in the day. You know, there is a certain demographic I associate with markets. It's not somewhere that I would naturally tend to go towards. Is there a demographic? Are we attacking different demographics?
The demographic, so we are attacking different demographics, but the part of our market strategy is we are primarily looking for fresh food and locally produced food, so that is the selling point. We're looking for to have a small street food area where people can come down, buy whatever from the fruit and veg stall and the fish stall, and then go and have a little pot of Thai noodles or whatever it is that they want to have. So we're primarily putting it against food rather than the cheaper peripherals of household goods, shall we say.
Yeah, that's interesting because, you know, my tours around the markets have demonstrated that, you know, you can buy golf clubs, potted
That'd be
plants.
Buntingford then, would it?
Well, I couldn't possibly comment. Potted plants, a double glazing on a good day.
Yep, that's where.
Not the sort of thing that I would associate with a market, with a thriving market. So I'm hoping that, you know, I don't think we can be exclusive.
No.
But equally, I'd like to be inclusive of those that, and I'm sure you can assure us that you're working on.
Yeah.
Sounds like you are. Okay. Do they cover the costs? Taking down, putting up, sweeping up, taking the rubbish away?
At the moment. So at the moment, the charter markets, we do not provide stalls for. The only one that we provide stalls for is the monthly farmers market. And that is because, as I say, the farmers market tend to be a smaller entry rather than the weekly markets tend to be the bigger operators in terms of market stalls. And we don't want to put a bar to our smaller producers and smaller businesses, because we see this as a way of generating income for small businesses as well. So the charter markets, they both wash their faces. That isn't to say we don't want some more income from them, because if we're going to be spending money on advertising, etc., etc., but just so that so you get an idea of the scale. 2019, I understand that the Hertford Farmers Market had 28 stalls. We're down to 8. So it's not that the capacity isn't necessarily, the capacity is there to do it. It's that it's been allowed to drift down so small that we need to build it back up again.
Of those, again, work with me on this. I'm reflecting on, casual visits. A couple of those were local businesses that had premises around the town anyway. So far, Foxholes is an example.
Yeah, exactly.
Foxholes had a caravan down there, but equally they're a mile up the road. So not more sustainable, I suspect to have it in the town. But okay, look, I want to go on about this. So, Sue, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, there's been lot of talk about food as an offering. And what about things like artisanal craft markets? Can that be in the mix?
That's part of what we want to do with the private markets, basically,
Like
is
the maltings model,
is because it's the private market still gives us an income, although not as much, because obviously if we're licensing each store, we get more money than if we give somebody a license to have 10 stalls, let's say, because they obviously need to make some money. But we would want to be looking at potentially using some of the private markets, like crafts or jewelry or whatever, to do some floating markets effectively. No, I'm not putting them on the canals.
No. I mean, there are a lot of entrepreneurs out there. I'm speaking personally as one of those who have not got many possibilities. You get on the waiting list for someone like Southern Maltings, and they give you one a year.
Yeah.
You can't make any money that way. So those opportunities would be gratefully received by a lot of people, I think.
I mean, just so everybody understands how the licenses currently work, we can either give you a 1-year license or a license for 4 weeks. There's nothing in between. So one of the things we've been promoting is the 4-week license in our marketing leaflets, which you can see some of them up there, to stall holders, so they can try it and just see how they do, basically. So that's either 4 months on the farmers market or 4 weeks on the charter market, basically. But we want to have a lot more flexibility than that. Both of the annual licenses are, I believe, £456 a year. So it's less than a tenner a week for the charter market, but you've got to bring your own stall, put it up, take it down, take your own rubbish away on the charter market. On the farmers market, the pricing is the same, but that's because we provide a stall as well. But that's one of the things we want to change the pricing of, because obviously there's a different cost to putting a stall up for people.
I was very interested in David's impression of what markets were about, and reminded me it's a bit like Call the Midwife, that sort of era and image. But I'm really pleased that there's some focus being placed on this, and actually my experience of markets is quite diverse, and actually even just in Welwyn Garden City on Saturday, they have a regular market now. And there's some very interesting produce being sold on there. So you've got whole stores that just sell olives, fresh olives, and then you've got others that sell Indian foods, artisan breads. There's lots of and local trades. And when I worked in the city for best part of a decade, we used to regularly go to Whitecross Street market once a week, and it was just all street food, and it was absolutely fantastic, and it was really busy. Anybody and everybody that was around that place used to go there for their lunch on that day, and you just either eat in the street during the summer or bring your food back to the office. So lots of opportunities with markets.
And that street food is exactly what we want to do with Ware, because it's a Tuesday. It's that cheeky Tuesday, pop down, get your lunch, maybe buy some veggies, go home again, you know.
Yeah, and possibly some themes from time to time as well to just get the excitement levels up. Where did we get to, Simon?
Could you put your microphone on, please?
I'm a great supporter of markets. I think they've been up and down in our memories. I mean, I remember it as a kid walking through Stalford, and you've got the cows and the sheep walking through the street and all of that sort of stuff. So, you know, we're not going to go back to that. And I recognise that there are all sorts of issues around markets, but I think this is a great idea. I just want to throw one at Eric here. What about Sawbridgeworth? I mean, I accept there's the traffic and perhaps lack of space. but-
Councillor Marlowe, did you notice I specifically didn't mention?
Well, you know, I'm subbing tonight. You know, it's. Come on, Eric, inform us.
Yeah, we did have one many years ago, and we've tried. The problem is location, because where we held it before was in the East Harts car park, which then took up a lot of space, and that then impacted local sports clubs and local businesses. So we've been looking at alternatives. It's possible, once the UK Shared Prosperity project is finished, that we might have an ideal place to then look again. So at the moment, it's on pause. I was going to say that anyway, just for info, that there's a reason why we're not on the list, but it will still be there somewhere for us to consider. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just finish? The thing that I wanted to say is that I think that if we can have successful markets, it does not help our high streets, you know, because there's a knock-on effect, and I think that's really healthy, you know. And if we can do that, great.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to say that to address your question, really, there definitely is a market. I'm not a great fan of markets, but there is, people do want them. A lot of the, you know, comments in Bishop's Stortford, there's lots on social media. Can we make it better? Can we have more stalls? And the guy who runs the market is actually working hard on that. It's a bit stymied by the weather this year, but definitely there is an appetite for more markets. So I think it's a really good thing for the council to focus on.
If I could just interject there, I read somewhere very recently that there was a suggestion that the main street through Stortford would be pedestrianised. Has any consideration been given? And that's the market, that's where the market is. Any consideration given to what effect that might have on the market if that goes ahead? Do we know about that?
I can answer that because I was at the committee meeting where it's discussed. We're thinking of time restricted pedestrianisation, so it's not going to be all the time, so people can go in and set up. But yeah, exactly.
Thank you. With the days of the markets, and I appreciate the how fast your horse can canter, maybe has some bearing on it. But the Buntingford market, I'm obviously talking from Buntingford, but it's on a Monday, which I don't think is a very good day for a market because most people are at work. Is there any scope to, I mean, I'm not in charge. I don't know, how does it work? Can you change the day or in discussion with the?
You can, but you only get the charter protection on the day that your charter says that you have your market.
Okay.
Monday is actually a fabulous day because with hybrid working, there are so many people working at home. This is why Tuesday is great as well, that people look for a distraction. So wandering into the centre of Buntingford to get your lunch might be because you know that there is 6 or 8, let's say, stalls selling good street food. We can see that as being great. And one of the things, this is part of what we want to do. It's partly why we would we've been talking to Buntingford, is that if you're a business and you can set up on Saturday at Hertford, Monday at Buntingford, Tuesday at Ware, that gives you a really nice local way of selling. On the days, one of the things I was talking to the licensing officer about today was whether we could do a farmers market possibly on a monthly basis for Buntingford. But again, it comes down to the location. So we've got to, exactly like Sawbridgeworth, we've got to find somewhere we can stick the stalls, because at the moment, unless, and I'm not saying we want to do this, but unless you close the high street down, you can't really stick a market down there.
Thank
would
you.
be a brilliant
That's really
idea.
helpful. Yeah, maybe it's not the day that's the issue. Maybe it's just perhaps we need other some. Oh, there's some of the stores are lovely, but I think maybe, like you say, like something wide. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes. So, yeah. So I just had a couple of questions. Well, one is sort of a more of a wondering thing, and the other one is is a question. So the wondering thing is, in terms of the demographics of the people who use the market, obviously there are lots of, I mean, I like street food and olives and so on. Lots of people sort of regret the decline of the high street because of online selling, and I wonder if there's a place for kind of, if you like, more traditional shops which have vanished from the high street, having, welcoming them into the market as well. So that's one of the things that sort of comes out from, particularly when I've spoken to, some of the older residents, they're regretting the high street that was. So that's one point. And the other question is, what would you like to see in a new market policy? Is it just around the flexibility of licenses, or is it what are the key sort of things, I suppose?
So it's partly around the flexibility on charging. It's also about there will be a sustainability policy included, because that's already half drafted, and we are looking at all the other bits and pieces, which, as I say, are things like being able to have private markets. So, and these are all unformed, slightly thoughts that we have discussed, but we are not necessarily putting into place. But at the moment, Hertford has a monthly farmers market. There wouldn't be scope to run 2 per month because we couldn't get the stall holders, because they all go and do different farmers markets basically. But what we might look at is something on the 4th Saturday of the month that would be a craft market or the vegan market or one of the private markets to supplement the main charter market.
Thanks, Jo. And thank you, Vicky, for the presentation and all the work. I know it's shoestring budget and not shoestring time. You mentioned that the National Association of British Markets were coming in and having a look, and I think that's great. I was wondering how much involvement have kind of that kind of expertise, and how much have you how much involvement has that kind of expertise had so far, and how much are you planning to get them to comment on the policy or reviews, and how much kind of have you been looking at kind of what's worked well elsewhere so we can try and replicate that versus kind of trying to do it all of ourselves?
So in terms of the policy, and I may be misquoting, so Jonathan may tell me off, but NABCMA, or however you pronounce it, have advised already on how our policy should, what laws it should come under. And as I understand it, we are going for a base of the Markets Act, and we're throwing in a bit of the Food Act as well. And I don't know quite how you do that, but apparently you can. We're also looking at pricing, and we are using a draft document that they've already produced, and we're looking at updating that. So we're using best practice basically. They charge money. I don't have that much budget. We're having to be very judicious in what we are paying for and what we're not paying for. They're coming in to do a one-off hit we are looking at some of their accredited people to be our part-timer, to come in and get the stalls for us, because we might as well have somebody who knows what they're doing and has a background in markets to do this, rather than an events organizer, which is where we were initially looking at. So we are taking their advice, but we can only pay for so much of it.
Yeah, I like what I hear there, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. Others are doing it. Others have done it. I'm going to defer to Calvin in a second, but the other thing is, are we going out and looking to poach, looking to see who, is there other markets that in due course we can persuade to jump over to us?
All I can say is that in one of my discussions with one of my another council's execs, they very happily informed me that their stalls cost £50 a week and ours are only a tenner a week, less than a tenner. So while I wouldn't possibly be wanting to go out and directly poach anybody, there might be an incentive to come to East Herts.
Thank you for that. No, but whilst we're on this, I think we're starting to get into slightly more depth than I originally thought we would with this, because it's been an excellent presentation. So I don't think it's appropriate now to dig too much deeper. I think we've got a much better understanding. Calvin, would you like to close us down on this one?
Just to say that coming from Bishop Stortford, which is not included in this policy, I very much welcome it, because I think it will be good for Hertford, good for Ware, good for Buntingford and wherever else. With regard to Bishop Stortford Market, it has bounced back quite considerably since the depths of the pandemic, and we have adopted, or the town council has looked to adopt, a more flexible charging policy, particularly in areas, because we have restrictions on where we can put it. It can be done on the street, but there are big restrictions there since at some point in the past they built a corn exchange on our market square.
Oh, yeah.
But to try and develop new areas, actually giving concessions to people and lower rates if you're trying to expand things. So I very much welcome it, and I think the demographic, just to address that point, I think that very much depends on what you're offering. So my wife would not be a usual market user, but she regularly goes down to the market for things like cheese and fish and things like that. And that food offering. So I look forward to seeing this, and I hope we will bring it back here and we can look at it in more depth. Okay, thank you.
So thank you for that. I think the difference is that Bishop Stortford's got somebody who's actively going out seeking stall holders, rather than a licensing authority that doesn't have that in their necessarily in their number one skill set. What I would say is all 5 pictures up there of people and stalls are all from Hertford Market in the last 3 weeks, because I do go down most Saturdays. The charter at the top, that's slightly different.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. There's nothing worse than a presentation that's supported by pictures from Getty when we've got, everything. Thank you. This is an impromptu. I found it, I think we've all found it useful. I think I found it immensely useful. It's certainly challenging some of my thinking around this. It's not a formal item. We don't have any recommendations, but while I've got your attention, we're focused on this. We do actually have it on the work programme to take this forward. I think personally, I feel we've had enough this evening to keep us ticking over on that. So I'd like to park it from the work programme for the time being, but we can revisit the concept back in October, maybe this time next year, and see whether we want to do some more. And hopefully there'll be more tangible evidence and data around who's rocked up, and the money has been spent wisely. Any opportunity to take some money from the funding that we were talking about earlier to support some of this? That's a leading question. Don't answer it.
I've been very fortunate in finding some other money, Mr. Andrews, so I think we're okay for now.
And Lorraine's going to take us into that now. I've got a few words to say.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be brief. This is your usual work programme summary, if I may pick up on some key points. On the first appendix on the work programme, it gives you a summary of the proposed topics. With regard to you've already had an update on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The next item was the access to parks. I understand officers have been providing some alternative dates to go and review some parks, but nothing firm has been agreed yet. You might be interested to know that the first of its kind playground for children with disabilities opened at the London Borough of Barnet recently at a cost of £500,000. London Borough Barnet apparently contributed 400,000 and the rest was, no, sorry. London Borough Barnet contributed 1,000 and the rest was privately funded. I can forward you the link on that if you'd like me to. The award of waste, that's coming back to ONS in June and then to the executive. The social housing providers, Chairman, I think has a few comments to make on that.
Yeah, we've discussed this a couple of times. A number of us here have had various degrees of experience with RSLs, from marginal to extensive. We've all got questions to ask them. We have gone out and asked them. The three we went to were.
I'll give you my top, Chairman, but please, those were the questions.
Circle Anglia and yeah. So the questions that were asked.
Not circling.
Well, whatever they are this week, they're Clarion today, aren't they?
Clarion.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm Stork Valleying. Sorry, yeah, it's just they were based opposite the police station. So these are typical of the questions. I won't go through the whole lot, but what improvements do you think would make a difference in your engagement process between tenants and organisations? At your organisation, well, anything basically. How are your complaints categorised? What steps are being taken to achieve carbon neutrality? Those sort of things. We're fairly familiar with them, and there's been a noticeable absence of responses. So it's really down to us. You know, where do we go with this? Those of us who've had some experience with them over the years probably think there's not much to be achieved, frankly. You may or may not recall, I'll come to you, Carolyn, you may or may not recall that the housing stock that this authority had under control was passed over to several RSLs over 20 years ago. And they've moved a long way away from what we would consider. I'd still get residents contact me and talk about council housing, but that's ingrained, I'm afraid. Carolyn, go on, sorry if you want.
Oh, I was just wondering which housing authority came back to you when you were?
Network Homes was the only one that came back to me out of three.
So, thank you.
Thingy. Potentially B3 living, but I'm not sure. But they're I think all of us at some stage have tried to get in touch with the RSLs. It is a truly unhelpful experience more often than not. Carolyn, do you want to come back? No. Simon?
No.
Can you put your microphone on, please?
Told I'm too loud at home, so I don't have a microphone. Next Wednesday, the 13th, at Southern Maltings, Sovereign what are they called? Sovereign Network Group are holding a community event. So you could perhaps wander along there, like a lot of our social prescribers are going to do, and batter them with some questions about their poor record.
Thank you.
Myself and Naim are on the panel for Network Homes, or SNG, and I have just been actually SNG are amalgamating, as you know, with Sovereign, and they had a meeting last night about a new structure for resident participation because, as you say, it's incredibly difficult to get in contact and to get them to do anything. And I've been struggling all of this week with this.
Well, going back to 2008 or 9, I got involved with Stork Valley, which then became Circle Anglia, and it was pretty much Circle Anglia and then Circle, all in a very short period of time. And there was a constant rotation of this, and it was always improving resident engagement. And none of it ever did. But it was just a moving feast that never, ever, ever achieved anything. Sorry, where was that? Was it you, Eric?
Yeah, just thinking, because some of the things you mentioned are strategic rather than operational, which, you know, we could scrutinise some of the operational things. But I'm just going back a few years when I had housing in my portfolio. It might have been the administration before last. And there was I think a quarterly forum with the housing team here in this chamber with a multitude of housing associations. And I think given the strategic nature of things, I don't know whether that's still going on or whether thoughts of doing this, but I would suggest that's a good thing to do. Thank you, Chairman.
I think one of the challenges, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with it, but I've probably got as close to this as any here. It's a self-perpetuating thing, and now these organisations are becoming so big that they're not even looking over their shoulder at us. Now, whether we feel that we have a duty to our residents who are in their accommodation to deal with it on a strategic basis or not, that's something for you to ruminate on and let me know your view. Peter.
I think we need to be very clear about the question that we're looking for the answers to, because we're in danger here of putting every housing association in the same boat, and they're not. They are very, very different organisations. And you're saying that these organisations are getting so large. Well, actually, there is one or two of them that are getting very large, but there are lots of very, very good, very small housing associations that provide a very good service to residents in this district. We have about 8,000 homes provided and looked after by housing associations in this district. It's about the same number of homes that are rented through private landlords. So there's about 8,000 of each of them. Sorry, I was the executive member with responsibility for affordable housing in the last administration. So these details are quite clear in my head. And I spent an awful lot of time during that last 4 years trying to build relationships with many of those key housing associations. And my experience differed across different housing associations. They're not all the same. Clarion, the biggest and I think it is probably the biggest in the country in terms of size. It constantly reinvents itself. There is a constant churn of senior people within that organisation. That doesn't help with relationships, and relationships are key. Now, since the change in administration, I have no idea how the current executive member is managing that relationship. It is torturous, but I think we need to be very clear about what question we are asking and what we're looking for in terms of answers, because it feels like it's a bit of a scattergun approach. And we've got some very specialist housing associations as well that look after specific groups of people. We've got extra care facilities. they're all very, very different. So I think if we're looking to get something fruitful out of this, we need to think very carefully about what answers are we looking for. I know that Carolyn served on Network Homes panel, and that setup is quite unique. And in my own opinion, Network Homes are much more engaged than I know you're shrugging your shoulders, Carolyn, but that's the fact, is that they are much more engaged with elected members and with their residents than any other housing association that serve our residents.
Yes, thanks for bringing us back to that. You're absolutely right. I mean, my dealings primarily were and continue to be with Clarion in their many forms, because I don't have any of the other on my patch, or didn't have until quite recently. And you're right, there are others. I mean, B3 living in Hoddesdon, Hightown, Pretoria, among them. There are half a dozen others of that ilk, who are much more closely engaged with their tenants, their customers. I think there's some work to be done with those, and we have to recognise that they are the ones that are picking up many of the affordable housing options that are coming through in the new developments. So I think this is beginning to morph into a slightly different exercise. The questions we asked, just as you put the point, what improvements do you think you can make, would make a difference in your engagement process between tenants and your organisation? In terms of response to repairs and the complaints process, what are your key performance objectives and your KPIs? How are your complaints categorised? In terms of housing stock, how is your stock graded? Habitable, voided, awaiting repair, condemned, etc. What steps are being taken, if any, to achieve carbon neutrality? And how do your new builds, especially those deemed to be affordable, comply with sustainability measures, solar panels, grey water, solar roof tiles, whatever, and so on. So I think the response thus far, I mean, the absence of of responses, it's really for us now to reassess what we're going to do about this and how we're going to move forward. We've got the digital exclusion and literacy attached to the work programme. What are the social housing providers steps are they taking to ensure that those who are struggling, and that might be part of the problem with some of them, are supported, especially those from different cultural groups, which again is beginning to emerge. We have Hong Kong Chinese in the district now. We have Syrians, we have Afghans, we have all sorts of people now joining us, and they will be going into social housing in many cases, and of course not least our own vulnerable and elderly. So I think there's some work to be done there. What's your thinking?
Yeah, this is just a sort of information question, really. East Herts does have a relationship with the social housing associations through, in some way, managing the housing referral list, doesn't it? But I'm not quite sure how that works, and whether there must be obviously relationships, if relationships between officers and housing associations if they're referring people on. And I suppose we could ask some questions about how that works and what information they get and how we do that and how they do that.
There's two elements to that. We have our own housing options department, and when the stock was transferred, there was a short period of hiatus, and then it was agreed that any RSLs offering properties in East Herts would do it through our housing options team, who set the criteria. We set the criteria, and they then work with it. But you also get the additional complication, and there may be others, but one complication is that you frequently get RSLs from other areas that are under pressure that privately buy houses on developments as they come forward, and others, and then put people in. And the one that I get not frequently, but regularly, probably a couple of times a year, is, oh, we've got a family moved in from Lewisham. Where's their local connection? The short answer is there isn't one, but Lewisham have bought that house, and we have no control over that. So they're a proposition, and there may be others. James.
Thank you, Chairman. I just did want to draw attention as well that one of the recommendations on this item 6 is recommendation C, obviously, to have a workshop arranged to discuss potential scrutiny topics. So I'm obviously aware of the conversation that you're having in the chamber this evening, but if you feel that you probably need a bit more time that's available to you this evening, and not workshopping it here this evening and doing it at that workshop instead, that might be a way forward.
Busting that jam. Yeah, I think you're right. We clearly need to know more.
Put it down.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, good. Right, this is the next one.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Going back to the appendix, climate change, carbon neutrality, you asked for a summary bulletin to be provided on that. I understand that this has now been finalised, which is good news. The next item was policing and the contributions that parish or town councils might be making to neighbourhood PCSOs. You do have some information in the report, Chairman, but by way of some more information coming to light, the 14 parish councils and 1 town council have responded. And the information that has recently been received is that Standen paid £16,340 in 21-22, and then £4,000 in 22-23, and then cancelled. Apparently, the clerk said it was going to go up to about 18,750, and they felt that the PCA wasn't spending sufficient time in the parish as they were being deployed in other areas. So they've decided not to take it any further. So that's an update on that. Given that update, do you want to now remove this from your
Yeah, I
work
brought that one
programme?
forward, and I'm perfectly content now that we've done all we can reasonably do around that. So unless anybody else has got a contrary view, we'll park that.
Yeah, okay. I'll continue to update members as and when the information comes in, Chairman. On the next item, you've had an update on the markets. The next item was the anti-racism charter. A summary bulletin has now been drafted on that and should be circulated shortly. In relation to the exploration of the use of herbicides, this issue was raised by the executive member Hoskins, and I've just had it confirmed that apparently we do use glyphosate, I don't know what that herbicide, in the district, and it's really for members to decide on what you want in terms of further information on this. And the last, yes.
Eric, glyphosate?
Yes, thank you. Yes, this caught my eye. I think I'm right in saying that highways still use it. If we're talking about use on the roads and street cleansing, on the roads that highways do the street cleansing, I'm just wondering whether we could have a paper that talks about the pros and cons, because I understand that some other types of weed killer have been used, or herbicides have been used, which don't actually keep the weeds back as much as glyphosate. So it would be really good to get the background and pros and cons.
Well, I've spent the last couple of weeks since this emerged. Not the right season for the weeds, but my recollection is that. My recollection is that if we are using glyphosate, then they're loving it, because they grow to half a metre in a matter of a couple of weeks. So something's going wrong. Either we're not applying it, or we're not applying it correctly, or yeah, we need to look around.
Yeah, I would support getting more information as to what the alternatives are and because obviously with glyphosate, it does make, or some herbicides, they make everything grow, and then you're supposed to apply it again, and then it kills it off. And if you only do one, or you don't do it frequently enough, you end up with more of a problem. So, but I also think that there is an environmental issue around this what are the effects of glyphosate on the total environment?
Yeah.
And are there alternatives that are better for the environment that are still economic to be used on? And yes, and
Yeah, much was said in full council a few weeks ago around chalk streams, and I've just been looking at some work I did on that 15 years ago. And I'm particularly concerned about what goes into our watercourses and then ultimately into our rivers. So, yeah. Okay, more information, please.
Yeah, okay, Chairman, I've got it down for a summary bulletin, so I'll pursue that with some key officers. Attached.
Rachel.
Yes. Yes, so I'd like to know a bit more, not just about the pros and cons, but also about the frequency of use and where it's used and how it's used. I mean, I understand that green flag parks, is that right? No, that I'm not sure if that's the right name there, but they are not. You're not allowed to use any kind of form of herbicide or pesticide in those parks. So it may just be that it's being used in a very localized way. But obviously, it is a great environmental concern. I mean, if we look at the State of Nature 2023 report and the sort of catastrophic decline of insects, you know, we can't really afford to use products which are pure, you know, for purely aesthetic reasons. We need to think about the ecosystem and the biosphere as well as, you know, a few pavement plants. So we do need to take a sort of a wider view on that.
It's a phenomenon known as the windscreen bug phenomena. There aren't any. 10 summers ago, certain days of the week, you'd find your windscreen was smeared with bugs, but not anymore. Yes, we don't want sides. There must be other ways of doing it. Peter.
Sorry, just before we go off this subject, can I just quickly go back to the subject around social housing providers? I don't know why I didn't think about this at the time, but as I've read through it again, back in May 2023, Council agreed a housing strategy that replaced an earlier one. I am aware that because part of that strategy was to do regular reviews, because I was very keen that we didn't create something that's just sat on a shelf, and that there would be an annual review of that. I am aware that work is not in May 23, it was May 22. And there is work that is underway reviewing the progress that's been made against those actions and pulling together some new actions to take us forward. And I just wonder whether asking for that to be brought to overview and scrutiny so that we can, one, kill two birds with one stone in terms of looking at the proposed actions, but also use the opportunity to broaden that strategy to include some of the actions that may address some of the issues that have been raised in this point.
Thank you. Yes, regarding glyphosate, I'd like to know as well, I think it's really important to remember that there is a class action being taken in the United States at the moment over the impact of use of glyphosate on human health and the operators who are using it in particular. So I think we need to look at that as well, not just whether it's effective at killing weeds.
Yeah, and also alternatives to chemicals for weed suppression, like using membranes, manual weeding. You know, you could get volunteers from communities to take on certain areas. It would
Yeah,
be
I alluded to that. You know, it doesn't have to be a side. We can do. It must be able to do it other ways, but
yeah,
might
it's
be
important.
backbreaking, but it could be.
But it's
could be done.
important because that involves
Certain
community.
weeds are very susceptible to certain types of insects. So I mean, ragwort, for example, one major method of controlling ragwort, which is often a concern, especially in the equine world, is to use insects.
Well, and you can do the community involvement thing by getting people involved in that.
Okay,
the
that
money
will come
saved.
out, I'm sure, in the wash, and you can bring it forward at the appropriate time. Okay, moving on.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, in addition to the work programme, there are a number of appendices that have been attached. These were summary bulletins for some initial information that you'd requested on a variety of topics, the DIS, adult literacy, cybersecurity, etc. And it's for members, hopefully, to form a view as to whether, you know, there's anything in this information that's been provided that provides you with a basis of moving forward from a scrutiny viewpoint, or you might want to discuss these further at the workshop. You might be able to draw out something there that you might want to look further at. I'm not sure it's for members. Okay.
Like it to, but it isn't. Hmm?
It's going to be sometime middle April, I would
Yeah.
think, early April,
Couple of
if that's
months.
right. Yeah.
Carolyn.
Very much like do the tackling. Beg your pardon. I'd very much like to include the tackling digital exclusion and literacy in the district. That's the one that I would highly favour, because I think we have real problems. Having read this whole thing right to the end, it's really quite frightening. Nearly a quarter of the population have lack of basic skills, and I really think we need to tackle it in some way. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If members want, as I say, I'll include those bulletins in an agenda for the workshop, so you can discuss them at length and tease out some more things that you might want to look at. Okay.
I think they all deserve more attention than we can probably give them now. Yeah.
Okay. Just a couple of quick comments here. You'll probably see that the corporate plan was agreed at council on 28th of February, and it's hoped that this will help members populate the work programme based on the council's now agreed priorities. And as I say, I make reference in the report that you've already had, that we're going to hold that workshop in April. So again, I'll attach the corporate plan so you can have a look to see what else, how you can actually tie up some priorities. The last thing I wanted to mention was there was a topic mentioned at council about water risk supply. I don't know whether you consider this at the last council meeting. I don't know whether you consider this to be a suitable topic for scrutiny. Again, I'm guided by members' advice.
I've discussed this with Eric today, and we certainly think it should come up at a later date. If there's an appetite to do it even quicker, fantastic.
I get a regular update from Affinity Water. I think it's monthly, which indicates, actually in quite a positive way, it's not propaganda. It's actually well thought out and well produced. But it does, you know, and it's warts and all about where we are with the current water supply and where the challenges lie. Do you get that? Do you see that? Do you recognise that? If you don't, we need to make sure that you're into that loop.
I do get the monthly bulletin from Affinity, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, that could potentially feed in, but we have to be aware of the fact that it's a vast challenge, which has always been there and probably always will be. And you know, what will our buck? What sort of influence will our buck get us? We could be better informed, but could be better. You know, given that we're already getting those bulletins, and I guess the opportunity is there to go back to them if something comes up in a bulletin that you want to query. We can go back to them, but this is possibly something we'd need to. I would suspect we'd need to work with others on this and get as we did with chalk streams all those years ago and what have you. Eric, good to see you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the motion that came up at council, and that's why we're having this discussion. And there were some red flags raised around the impact and approaching it a particular way. And I was thinking, and I expressed this to Nick as well, that it might be the best time to do this is because I'm presuming, I'm looking over at the leader of the council, that a district plan executive panel will be reformed as the review of the district plan comes through. And it's probably safer than to raise any challenges around what the future review district plan looks like. So in other words, if there are things that we would like to see as a council to ensure there are safeguards, then that might well be the forum to do that.
Yeah, we're all aware of challenges at both ends of the water cycle that we use, and that's obviously supply and then disposal. I'm a little concerned as what we as a committee could do with, we could spend all of our time on this and go absolutely nowhere, other than be better informed, and how would that achieve anything for our residents? So I think, yeah, I get that. That's a perfectly sound suggestion. We do have this absurd situation in this country where you can build something and they have to supply. Completely unsustainable and completely unrecognisable in the rest of Europe that I've visited, where everything is in place before the first brick is laid. But heck, that's where we are. Is that captured? Okay, we're good. At the last one.
Yep, that's it, Chairman. Just drawing members' attention to the recommendations, and you've provided guidance.
Page 52. Recommendations A, B, and C, D, and E. We have a view. We discussed where we're going with glyphosate. We want a little bit more, and we want broader options for the dealing with weeds. Some people call them plants. It depends on your attitude. Delivery of services using smart devices and influencing social change digitally. We've decided that we're going to bring that in. So can we take B out, because we're going to bring that into the workshop? So it's B's pretty much irrelevant here. Do you agree? We remove B because we're going to put it into the workshop. Likewise, C, a workshop is being arranged. And the update would be noted, and the work programme, insofar as we've done it this evening, is, I'm going to suggest noted. Noted, not agreed. Are you content with that? Can somebody please propose? Thank you, Sue. Seconded by Nick. Excellent. Quick show of hands if all agree. Thank you very much. I've not been advised of any urgent business, so at 21:02, I'm very pleased to close the meeting, and thank you all for your contributions. That's really, really helpful.